Aquarius, have you ever stepped into a completely ordinary evening and yet carried a feeling that doesn't quite belong? Everything around you looks the same. The sounds, the lights, the rhythm of life, nothing has really changed. And still, something inside you feels like it's shifting. Just a little. Not strong enough to name, not clear enough to explain. Just, you begin to notice the way you see things is no longer quite the same. A thought lingers a little longer than usual. A feeling no longer fades as easily. And somewhere in the middle of all these ordinary moments, you find yourself wondering, is this just something passing through, or the quiet beginning of something deeper, something you haven't fully recognized yet? And if this feeling touches you in some quiet way, then maybe. What comes next might help you see a little more clearly what has been gently unfolding within you. Aquarius. There are evenings that pass by so quietly, so ordinarily, that if someone asked you, was there anything special about today? You might just gently shake your head. Everything moves as it always does. Familiar messages, unfinished tasks, thoughts looping in circles you've walked through many times before. And then, in a very small moment, when you pause just a little longer, maybe while looking out the window or right after your phone screen goes dark, you begin to notice something inside you feels slightly different. Not clear, not intense, not strong enough to demand a name. Just a very subtle shift, like returning to a place that once felt so familiar. Everything is still there, the same chair, the same light, the same space, and yet the feeling isn't the same anymore. You can't quite point to what has changed, and maybe that's what leaves you a little unsettled. Because you're Aquarius, you're used to understanding things. You want meaning. You look for logic. You try to give your feelings a name. But this time, this feeling didn't come to be analyzed. It arrives like a very gentle wave, touching you and staying. Quiet, unhurried, just enough to let you realize you're no longer standing in the exact same place you once were. You might find yourself wondering, what is this? Is it a kind of quiet exhaustion that's been building up? A shift happening outside of you that you haven't fully noticed yet? Or just a passing feeling that will fade away soon? And still, maybe not everything needs to be explained right away. Some of the deepest movements within us don't begin with answers. They begin with a feeling that slows you down, that makes you look a little longer, that softens the weight of things that once felt so important without needing a clear reason. You're still you, and yet, something in the way you show up in this world is quietly changing. And what's interesting is, it doesn't ask anything from you right now. No big decisions, no dramatic actions, just awareness. That sometimes change doesn't arrive like a storm. It comes like a different breath, a slower heartbeat, a pause you might have once passed through quickly, but this time you stay a little longer. And in that pause, you may begin to notice something very small. You don't have to rush back to who you used to be just because it feels familiar. Because the feeling of not quite the same anymore isn't always a sign of loss. Sometimes, it's simply the way you realize you're stepping into another version of yourself, quietly. Aquarius. There are movements within you that never arrive with loud sounds. They don't show up as firm decisions. They don't come with a clear moment you can point to and say, this is where everything began. Instead, they feel like a slow current, moving quietly through you, so gently that you only notice it once you've already arrived somewhere different. A thought passes through your mind. At first, it seems random, but then it returns, not demanding, not forceful, just there, lingering longer than you expected. A feeling can be the same. Not intense enough to overwhelm you, yet deep enough that you can't brush it aside the way you used to. And what's interesting is, you didn't try to hold on to it. It stayed on its own. Aquarius, you're someone who likes to understand before you believe. You question things. You reflect. You analyze. You look for cause and effect. But this time, this may not be a moment for answers. Not because you're not capable, but because not every shift needs to be explained the moment it begins. Some things are meant to be felt first, before they are understood. You might start to notice the way you respond to certain things has changed. Something that once stayed with you all day now passes more lightly. A concern that used to take up so much of your energy no longer holds you the same way. Not because those things disappeared, but because their place within you is quietly shifting, like rearranging an old room. Everything is still there, but the way it exists feels different. And sometimes the most meaningful change isn't about adding something new into your life. It's about how gently you begin to set certain things down. No announcement, no noise, just you're no longer carrying them with every step you take. And on a deeper level, you may begin to notice that you're listening to yourself in a different way. Not listening so you can respond quickly, but listening so you can understand. You're no longer rushing to find the right answer. You're no longer forcing yourself to feel certain about everything. Instead, you allow yourself to remain in the middle of what is unfolding, and within that space, something subtle is being rearranged inside you, not following your old plans, not moving by familiar logic, but guided by a rhythm that perhaps you hadn't noticed before. This might slow you down. You may not react as quickly as you once did, but maybe this isn't delay. Maybe it's a quiet form of growth, a kind of maturity that doesn't need urgency to move forward, where you don't have to understand everything in order to keep going. You only need to feel safe enough to stay with yourself a little longer. And maybe, within these silent movements, you are slowly becoming a version of yourself you never quite imagined before, in the most natural way. And then, as you stay a little longer with those quiet inner movements, you may begin to notice another kind of shift, more subtle, yet somehow clearer if you're willing to listen. There are things that once took up so much space inside you, and now they don't seem to sit in the same place anymore. Not because they've disappeared, not because you've fully resolved them in some complete, perfect way. It's just they don't feel as heavy as they once did. You still remember. You still understand. But you no longer carry the same feeling every time you think about them. It's like reopening a book that once stirred something deep within you. But this time, you read it with different eyes. No rush, no tension, just seeing. Maybe before, you held on to everything very tightly. Unanswered questions, unclear connections, expectations you weren't even sure you truly needed. You carried them as if letting go would mean losing a part of yourself. But now, something has shifted. You no longer feel the need to hold on to everything, not because you've become indifferent, but because you're beginning to understand that not everything needs to be kept in order to prove something. There were things that once mattered deeply to a past version of you, and that mattered. It was real. But as you change, the way you relate to those things changes too. And this is not loss. It's more like walking a long road, and at some point, you pause and look down at the bag you've been carrying. You begin to notice some of the things that were once necessary for an earlier part of the journey are now just weighing you down. And you don't throw everything away. You simply set some things down, gently. No noise, no dramatic goodbye. Just a quiet decision that you don't have to carry everything to keep moving forward. Aquarius. You may start to notice that your reactions are changing too. A familiar situation, but this time you don't feel the need to argue it all the way through. An old emotion, but this time you don't let it carry you as far as it used to. Not because you're avoiding it, but because you've seen that not everything deserves your energy. And there's a very quiet kind of growth hidden in that. Not the kind that shows up through big decisions, but the kind you recognize in very small choices. The moments you choose peace instead of reaction. The moments you pause instead of stepping back into an old cycle. And maybe there are times when you wonder if you're changing too much. If letting go of things that once mattered means becoming someone else entirely. But maybe you're not losing yourself. You're simply becoming lighter so you can carry what truly belongs with who you are becoming. And in that lightness, there's a very particular feeling. Not a clear kind of happiness, not a complete sense of release. Just enough space for you to breathe a little easier. Enough space so you don't have to keep everything in its old place. Enough space to realize that some things don't have to be held on to forever to still have value. They were once a part of you, and that is enough. And maybe, as you begin to move forward with this lighter way of being, you'll slowly come to see that What you've been searching for was never about holding on to more, but about understanding what is truly meant to stay. And as the things that once felt heavy are slowly set down, a new kind of space begins to appear. Not the kind of emptiness that comes from loss, not the feeling that something is missing, but a space where you're no longer stretched thin between too many thoughts, a kind of peace that's hard to explain. It doesn't come from everything around you becoming perfect, not because every question has found its answer, not because life suddenly feels easier. It's simply, you're no longer trying to force everything to fit the way you once believed it should. You still care, you still notice, there are still things that cross your mind, but the way you hold them inside has changed, lighter, softer, and somehow more open. Aquarius, you might notice a very small moment when you pause in the middle of your thoughts and instead of continuing to analyze, you simply breathe out. A deeper breath than usual, not to solve anything, just to stay with yourself. And in that moment, a very gentle feeling may arise. This is okay. Not the kind of okay you tell yourself to cope, not a form of giving up, but a quiet kind of acceptance that you don't have to understand everything right now in order to keep going. There were days when you may have tried to find answers for everything that felt unclear. You wanted to know where things were heading, to understand the next step, to feel certain. But now, maybe you don't need that in quite the same way anymore. You still care about the future, but you're no longer letting it pull you away from the present moment. You're beginning to realize that some phases in life are not meant to be figured out, but to be lived through. And this doesn't make you weaker. If anything, it brings a different kind of strength, a strength that doesn't come from control, but from no longer needing to control everything in order to feel safe. At first, this kind of peace might feel unfamiliar because it doesn't arrive with excitement. There's no peak, no clear signal, just everything inside you no longer collides the way it used to. Thoughts still come, feelings still rise, but they don't carry you as far. You stay with them, without being pulled under. And in that staying, you begin to see something more clearly, that life doesn't have to be perfect for you to feel okay. Not everything has to fall into place for you to allow yourself peace. Sometimes, peace is simply no longer fighting what is already happening. You're not resisting your own emotions, not trying to fix everything all at once, not pressuring yourself to figure something big out. You're just there, present, with yourself, with what is. And what's interesting is, within that presence, a very subtle feeling begins to form, that you are enough, not in a perfect sense, but in the sense that you are not lacking anything you need to keep moving forward. And sometimes the turning point doesn't come from life changing all at once. It comes in the moment you stop trying to force everything back into your old script, when you allow things to unfold in their own way and trust that you can adapt, that you can find your way, even without seeing the entire path ahead. Maybe this isn't a loud kind of peace, not the kind you immediately recognize, but if you stay still long enough, you'll notice it's there, very gently, and real enough for you to begin to believe. You don't have to hold everything together so tightly just to keep moving through what comes next. And then, as everything inside you begins to settle into its own quiet rhythm, something else starts to appear, not new, but clearer than before. A familiar feeling, something you've likely experienced many times, but never really paused long enough to listen to. Intuition. It doesn't arrive as a clear voice. It doesn't offer specific instructions. It doesn't try to convince you of anything. It's simply a very quiet knowing. A feeling that comes quickly, yet stays far longer than you expect. Before, you may have questioned it. You wondered if it was just a passing emotion or a thought not logical enough to trust. So, you analyzed. You weighed things out. You searched for more evidence just to be sure you weren't feeling it wrong. But this time, something is different. Not because your intuition has become stronger, but because you're no longer so quick to dismiss it. You're beginning to see that some things don't need to be proven to have meaning. A feeling of rightness doesn't always come with a clear reason. And a sense of this no longer fits doesn't need an explanation to be valid. Aquarius. You might notice this in the most ordinary moments, When you meet someone and for no clear reason, you feel at ease, no effort, no adjustment, just natural. Or the opposite, there are situations where you no longer feel the need to stay too long, even when everything on the surface seems fine. You're no longer forcing yourself to feel the way you used to. You're no longer stretching things out that have quietly outgrown their place in your life, not because you've become distant, but because you're becoming more honest with yourself. And that honesty is very quiet. No announcement, no explanation to anyone else. You just know what feels lighter when you stay, and what slowly drains you when you try to keep holding on. Your intuition doesn't ask you to act right away. It doesn't rush you, it doesn't pressure you. It simply exists, like a soft point of contact within you, each time you stand in front of a choice. And this time, you don't turn away. You don't ignore it just to follow what seems more reasonable. You stay with that feeling a little longer, long enough to realize it isn't random. Maybe you won't change everything right away. You'll still move through your life, still do what you usually do. But the way you make decisions is beginning to shift. Less noise, less influence from the outside, closer to what you truly feel within. You don't need to be 100% certain. You don't need to see the entire outcome ahead of you, just a feeling clear enough to take one small step in that direction. And maybe this is how you begin to trust yourself in a new way, not by controlling everything, but by listening and honoring the quiet signals that have always been there. There may still be moments when you doubt, when you return to old questions, but this time, you no longer ignore that first feeling the way you once did. You don't need to explain why. It's simply, you know. And sometimes that alone is enough to lead you in a different direction, quietly, but honestly. And then, after everything you've quietly moved through within yourself, there may come a moment when you pause and wonder, so, what is actually happening? It's a very natural question. Because as humans, we want to understand. We want to name what we feel. We want to know where we are in our own journey. But maybe not everything needs a clear answer to hold meaning. Some changes don't arrive to be explained. They arrive to be lived with. You may not see a specific turning point. There may be no single day you can mark and say, this is when everything changed. It's just, when you look back, you realize you're no longer standing where you used to be. Not because you tried to leave, not because something forced you to change, but because something within you shifted on its own, in the most natural way, like a season quietly passing. You can't point to the exact moment one season ended and another began, but you can feel it. The air is different. The light is different. Even the way you move through your day feels different, and somehow that is enough. Aquarius, maybe you don't need to name what's happening inside you. You don't have to rush to understand it all. You don't have to explain it to anyone, because not every journey is meant to be put into words. Some journeys are meant to be felt. Through your quiet and honest presence, you may still be around the same people, in the same spaces, within routines that haven't changed much. But the way you exist within all of it has changed. You no longer react the way you once did. You're no longer holding yourself in place just to keep things familiar. You're no longer trying to return to a version of yourself simply because it feels predictable. And maybe that's the part that matters most. Not how much you've changed, but that you've allowed yourself to change in a way that feels natural. No force, no rush, nothing to prove. Just, you're no longer standing still. There may still be moments when you return to old thoughts, old emotions, but this time, you're not inside them the way you used to be. You can see them. You can understand them. But they don't hold you in the same way. And that is a very quiet kind of freedom. Not the loud kind where everything is left behind, but a deeper kind, where you're still there, yet no longer bound in the same way. You don't have to run to get somewhere else. You only need to notice that you've already begun to move, step by step, small, slow, but real, and sometimes that alone is enough for a new path to begin. If you've listened this far, and something in this story feels like it reflects you, then maybe you don't need to do anything more right now. No decisions, no immediate changes, just Allow yourself to stay in this movement a little longer. Trust that whether you name it or not, whether you fully understand it or not, what's unfolding inside you is gently guiding you toward a place that fits who you are becoming. And maybe, someday, when you look back at this moment, you'll smile softly and realize everything had already begun to change through the smallest of shifts.